This is Chapter 10, PowerPoint Video Part 2. Again, all images within this PowerPoint video are in the public domain. Hopefully you had a chance to watch the full PowerPoint video from Chapter 10, Part 1 at the end, where Hamilton and Jefferson have a discussion regarding the National Bank. As you can tell, maybe from that, this is the earliest stages of kind of a major split of opinion, and it is expressed between Jefferson's kind of view of a weaker government and states' rights in particular. So the Jeffersonians are the anti-federalists. Eventually they become kind of these Democrat Republicans. And then we also have the Hamiltonians, the Federalists. And the Federalists quite literally die when Hamilton himself is killed in the duel. We'll talk a little bit more about that here later in this PowerPoint. So the idea that a once personal feud between Hamilton and Jefferson develops into bitter political rivalry. This then is exemplified with North and South, manufacturers versus agricultural, North and South, and then also the big states' rights issue that Jefferson is a champion of. So this chart here is in your book on page 186. So take a look at that chart, take a look at this chart, and it kind of gives you the evolution of the major parties, even to some extent all the way to the present day, the Democrats and the present Republicans, although this is way oversimplified. Another thing that is occurring at the earliest stages of the American experiment, this United States, the Constitution, another thing that is occurring is the French Revolution. And a lot of the French citizens are trying to maybe use the United States Revolution as an example for their own revolution. And initially, Thomas Jefferson does come out in support of this, and he talks about how the French despotism could not be eliminated in a very comfortable way. In other words, one could not expect to be carried from French despotism to liberty in a feathered bed. These God-fearing Federalist aristocrats nervously fingered their tender white necks and eyed Jefferson with very apprehensively. So again, the anti-federalists, eventually the Jeffersonians, the Democrat Republicans, want states' rights, individual rights, and they are against a strong central government. And during the French Revolution, this makes the Federalists a bit nervous. Later on, Jefferson does condemn the violence in particular that occurs in the French Revolution. With the French Revolution going on in Europe, and also some disputes with the British, it was clear that George Washington wanted the United States to remain neutral, and so his neutrality proclamation of 1793 declared this. But there continued to be some conflicts with the British on the western frontier, especially in the territories of Indiana and other western kind of frontier areas. A couple of skirmishes and battles occurred between the British-supported Indians at the Battle of Fallen Timbers and others along the western frontier, and it became, in a last-ditch effort, very important for George Washington to try to promote peace. In this desperate attempt to secure peace, George Washington sent the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, to London to negotiate a peace. Of course, it alarmed many of the Jeffersonians when, as Jay arrived, he kissed the Queen's hand. This was a sign to many of the Jeffersonians that this peace treaty was not going to be in their favor. Southern planters would have to pay. If you look at this, the Americans, this is the treaty, and the Americans would pay debts still owed to the British merchants. And so this is a bit of a problem, because debts still owed to the British merchants are going to be mainly the southern planters. They would have to pay a major share of these debts, while the Federalist shippers would be paid damages. The British were going to reimburse for damages. So, according to the Jeffersonians, the North benefited, and the South did not benefit at all from Jay's treaty. Again, growing regional tensions starting to show themselves. As war is averted with Jay's treaty, George Washington gives his farewell address, and he warns against entangling alliances and tries to make sure that the United States understands that it is important they remain neutral and no entangling alliances in the future. That leads us then to the election of 1796, as George Washington steps down after 2 terms. So this election, we have Adams winning as a Federalist. The second place person was Thomas Jefferson, and according to the Constitution originally, as it is written, then the Vice President becomes the second place person. Jefferson becomes the Vice President. So you have people, Thomas Jefferson, the Vice President, John Adams, the President, and they are kind of on opposite parties. So this is his John Adams becomes known as his rotundity because of his larger girth, but instead of kind of making fun of John Adams, because he was kind of insistent on calling George Washington His Excellency instead of Mr. President, and so as a nickname they started to call the new president His Rotundity. As John Adams becomes president, he inherits this sticky situation with France and England. The French were infuriated by Jay's treaty. They were condemned it as an initial step towards an alliance with Britain, their potential foe, and so they were pretty upset with the Americans, and John Adams was kind of placed in a hard kind of dilemma. So for retaliation of the Jay's treaty, French warships began to seize defenseless American merchant ships in the Mediterranean and Atlantic Ocean. Altogether, about 300 of these ships had been seized, and the United States at the time really had no navy and no power to do anything about it. Adams kept his cool for the most part, taking Washington's advice and trying to steer clear of war at all costs. He sent a diplomatic team, a commission of 3 men, including the future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Marshall, to France. They had hoped to meet with the French foreign minister, but as this meeting was in the process of being set up, they were approached by 3 go-betweens, and these 3 people demanded a bribe of $250,000 just to get the opportunity to talk to the French foreign minister. These 3 go-betweens were later referred to as X, Y, and Z. So these 3 French go-between people who demanded a bribe of $250,000 just to talk to the French foreign minister, this became known as the XYZ affair, and the slogan, "Millions for defense but not 1 cent for tribute," was a very popular slogan, and war hysteria spread through the United States. So patriotism above party is an important theme here. Potential war with France was renewing American patriotism and a renewed popularity in President Adams. As the election of now 1800 approached, John Adams deserved credit for a last-minute push for peace. But Adams not only avoided the hazards of war, but also unwittingly smoothed the path for a peaceful purchase of Louisiana 3 years later. Now, even though this peace with France maybe wasn't super popular, it was very important. So eventually we're going to look at the election of 1800, where Thomas Jefferson wins, but John Adams deserves credit then because of this peace. Now, as the election of 1800 approaches, John Adams puts into place the Alien and Sedition Acts, and these are very controversial and probably unconstitutional, especially when you consider that the vice president himself is of the opposite party as the president. So aliens, these pro-Jeffersonian immigrants, would be required to be residents for 14 years to become citizens, voting citizens. And dangerous, and nobody knows for sure what that means, but dangerous foreigners could be deported or imprisoned, and false defamation of government officials, including the president, would be liable with a heavy fine. What is false defamation? Does that mean that the vice president, if he is critical of the president, and remember they're on opposite parties, if the vice president is critical of the president, does that mean that he is liable for imprisonment? And then we can look here at this other one, the spitting lion. Congressman Matthew Lyon spit in the fate of the Federalist. So then, according to the Alien Sedition Acts, Matthew Lyon, he was sentenced to 4 months in jail. Unbounded thirst for ridiculous pomp, foolish adulation, and self-avarice. Another culprit was lucky to get off with a $100 fine after he expressed the wish that the wad of a cannon fired in honor of Adams had landed in the seat of the president's breeches. So clearly a violation of the First Amendment rights of free speech. These people were punished for expressing opinions. This is a cartoon here about those that are critical, the Federalists that are critical, or the anti-Federalists that are critical of the Federalists, risk going to jail. That concludes Part 2 video PowerPoint. The last maybe couple chapters of the last couple paragraphs of the chapter do talk about the election, Federalists versus the anti-Federalists, and this is the election between the President and the Vice President. Thomas Jefferson is running. We'll look at that and cover that election at the beginning of the next PowerPoint video. Please don't hesitate to email or give a call if you have any questions regarding the material covered in this PowerPoint.